Welcome to Lead Different.
Why not leadership? Why not lead different?
Welcome to Lead Different, the podcast that redefines leadership and challenges the status quo. Hosted by Daniel Dominguez, founder and CEO of Why Not Leadership. This show is your compass to becoming a better leader through the power of self-awareness. Good leaders foster teams that are engaged, empowered, and energized. Join us on this transformative journey as we equip you with the tools and insights to lead different. Get ready to challenge the ordinary and embrace self-aware leadership. This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different, because great leaders change the world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lead Different podcast for this week. I'm excited to introduce you to a very special friend of mine who I've met recently through another coaching contact. He is a very interesting individual with a diverse background. Dr. Larry Nicholson is a seasoned law enforcement and national security executive with over 3 decades of experience leading intelligence, training, and organizational development initiatives. He has served in top roles at the FBI, the U.S. Department of Energy, and state public safety agencies, overseeing training for hundreds of analysts and guiding major law enforcement programs. He's an expert in leadership, behavioral organizational development, and executive coaching. He has delivered over 600 programs worldwide and has authored multiple books on law enforcement, executive protection, and professional development. He holds a PhD in police administration and advanced certifications in positive psychology and strategic leadership. His work has earned him numerous federal awards and international recognition, reflecting his lifelong commitment to excellence in leadership and training. So with that fantastic introduction, let me introduce you to Dr. Larry Nicholson. How you doing, Nick?
Dan, I'm doing great. It's a great Friday here in Williamsburg, Virginia, and just enjoying the sun for a change. We've had quite a bit of rain.
Fantastic. What the weather is rainy there. We've had an endless summer here in New Mexico, Nick, and as you know, you've been here. Our summers tend to linger, and then we just go right into winter sometime in November, December. So yeah, I was just commenting on the weather there a little bit. Man, what an introduction. It's a pleasure to have you on. I've not had someone on with your level of experience dealing with security and dealing with leadership at a high level, such as you have. Tell us a little bit take us through your story. How did you end up in law enforcement, and then how did you end up at the federal level? And I know you started out, well, tell us where it all started, and then we'll walk through it.
Okay. Dan, I think one of the primary aspects of where I started was the concept of wanting to serve people, wanted to protect people and go through that process. At an early age, I'd say when I went into the Air Force, I went in the Air Force as a security policeman, and I thought, now this has really got to be the kind of thing I want to do. I experienced probably limited experience in law enforcement there, but after I got out of the Air Force, I started working local agencies in New Mexico, Bernalillo County Sheriff's Department, as well as Rio Rancho City. And as I moved through that process, I had an opportunity to go to the Department of Energy. And our primary goal at Energy is the safe and secure transportation of nuclear material across our nation's highway. And I thought, oh man, that's going to be cool. You're going to be able to drive across the country, spend 10 days away from home, kind of get some experience. And I found that was like, no, I gotta find another opportunity, because I was away from the family too much. And I found some other positions within the Department of Energy, and eventually was put in charge of special agent in charge of our I will say internal affairs group in energy. From there, I had an opportunity to go to the FBI National Academy. while I was at Energy. And I walked out of that experience at Quantico for just saying, I'm coming back to Quantico somehow. I'm going to be an instructor. I don't know where or how it's going to happen yet, but I just had the faith it was going to do. I was going to be able to do that. And before that, though, I actually had an opportunity to go to the Department of Justice and ran a counterterrorism program with some great folks at Sandia National Laboratories. And I was their leader, but many times I felt like more of a follower, following scientists and engineers. And then my last federal position really, I think it really honed not only my leadership skills and ability to teach leadership and interact with students, but it was an opportunity for me to teach leadership at the National Academy, where I had graduated several years earlier. And from there, I was selected to be the program manager for Intel analyst at the FBI as well. And that's kind of the story. You know, my family sometimes looks back at it and we talk about it, and they said, Dad, you can't keep a job. You just gotta, you're always moving around. And I heard early on in my career that one of my mentors said to me, look, you will always have your highs and your lows in a career position, but in those highs, that's when you should start looking for something that might interest you outside of where you're at, because eventually you'll hit a low. And you don't necessarily want to be remembered for the lows in an organization, particularly when those lows were not anything that you caused. So, and since then, since leaving and retiring from the federal service, we've been in a consulting role, both in the area of security, and then we kind of have another bifurcation, if you will, of that into leadership and coaching.
You know, it's interesting as you mentioned your career and the changes that you made. I want to make sure we talk about your why operating system, because we've gone through that process with you and how it's impacted those decisions, because I really like to dig into that a little bit more. So your why came when we did the YOS discovery with you. Your why came back as someone who challenges the status quo and who likes to do things differently. And when we think about most of the people that I work with who have the why of challenge, that normally doesn't normally doesn't match a long career in government work. But the way you did it is different. You changed jobs very often. You didn't get bored. You often probably showed up at places and found things to change, found things to do differently, innovated and created different systems. The second part of your YOS is to make sense, which is to solve problems. So you challenge the status quo by solving problems. So I can imagine that at every duty station that you showed up at as a problem solver who challenged the way things were done, maybe people didn't like the way you were changing things, but they loved that you were solving problems, right? And so that gave you that credibility. And it even speaks a little bit to that advice that someone gave you that, eventually you're gonna have a low. And we all have lows, by the way. I share Make Sense and Challenge with you. So I know all about that, because when we go around changing things and being creative and doing things differently, we sometimes can get in trouble. Your advice that someone gave you sounds like something I remember a colonel once said. He said, Lieutenant, not every great idea you have is a good idea.
Yeah.
Right. And so similar, but I'd love to hear, and then, let's make sure we talk about your what of simplify. So keeping things simple. So I can see where all those are gifts that you used, so you were able to challenge the status quo by solving problems and then delivering simple solutions. Tell us how that played out, that part of your makeup played out in your career.
Sure. Dan, let me say first of all about the assessment or the process of why not that you walked me through was pretty helpful in the idea of looking back and saying, okay, now I can pretty well understand where I'm at, why I was doing some of the things I was doing and how I did it. I think one of the caveats to challenging that I learned early on is that when you come new into an organization, particularly taking over a unit or a new organization, and I say taking over, going into the leadership role,
right?
At first, I've seen a lot of senior leaders, particularly those in law enforcement coming through the FBI National Academy, would go into a new position. The first thing they want to do is change things. They just want to change for this, and sometimes for the sake of change. They're actually trying to bring a organizational thought process they had somewhere else into a different organization. And I found right away that's a failure. That is going to be a failure. And there's all kinds of I have analogies associated with which I won't go into some of those analogies. But what I discovered was if you go into a new organization, and as you're moving it, you just got to keep an eye out for three things. Is there any illegal activity going on? If there is, you got to change things. You got to do it right away. Is there any unethical behavior going on? And if there is, you've got to work at that and change those things. And then there's been some, I think, debate what moral behavior is, but we would look at that and say, if there's anything moral going on in the organization, you got to change it right away. But if not, if you don't have those three areas existing, wait a while before you start making change. Indoctrinate yourself into the process. And I think that's really when I started looking at the why. Why do I do the things I'm doing? And then looking and just going even further that, how do I go about doing that? I'm not the smartest guy in the world, and that's pretty obvious. Everybody knows me very well, including yourself. But the one thing I do try to do, and really I think is excelled at it in my past, we'll say 10, 15 years, is finding people who know what they're experts what they're doing and listening to them and taking that opportunity to not only listen to them, but then implement some of the things they're saying and their understanding of it. And I think this really comes down to the last part of why, just trying to keep things simple. We try to many times just to make things so complicated that it's really difficult to understand. And when I ask people questions like, why are you doing what you're doing? And then the answers come back, and many times I have to kind of drop again and say, well, why are you doing that? And eventually we get to the real, meaningful part of why they're doing what they're doing.
So you challenge them as to why is that happening? I love the three things you looked for, and I think leaders, if you're listening, this is really good advice, because I think that happens to all of us, right? And I took over military commands, and then in the sales world, I took over sales teams. And it's real easy to come in and want to change things and put your stamp on the organization. But the three things you looked at is there anything going on that's illegal? Is there anything going on that's unethical? If there's anything going on that's immoral or that doesn't line up with your moral values. But if none of those three things are going on, take the time to learn and kind of sit with it. Like you said, I think it's a great word to use. Indoctrinate yourself into the unit. Understand how they run things, because there will be things to improve. There will be things that you'll see, and I want to commend you for being modest with regards to your intelligence. And I think we all could use a little bit of modesty, but the fact of the matter is, as a make sense person, you have a gift of processing information fast, being able to look at situations and come up with solutions. And I've often said this, that it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's just you got a faster processor than most people. So you process information faster. And so you're able to come up with solutions. Has that ever been a problem for you in your leadership? And you can take us back to an example where, hey man, you got it and nobody else did. And it's so frustrating, right? Because you get it, you know what you need to do. And I often warn leaders, when you have the why of makes sense somewhere in your top three, be careful you don't leave your troops behind, because it makes sense to you and you're ready to move forward. Everybody's behind you saying, wait a minute, Nick, where are we going? Can you think of an example where you maybe solved a problem too fast and had to slow down and come back? And how have you dealt with that so that you don't do it in the future?
Dan, the one that immediately comes to mind, I was thinking through this process as I was preparing for our podcast today, is an issue that was prominent at the FBI Academy right after 9/11. There was a report sent out by the Office of Director of National Intelligence to the FBI that basically said that the FBI is really good at surveillance. The FBI is good at many things, but they have a really poor intelligence type of operation going on. And so, fortunately or unfortunately, I was selected to be the program manager for the Intel Analyst program at Quantico. And so one of the first things we did was I stepped in and I looked at it and I looked at the curriculum, and the curriculum was really basically written for college students who are going through an Intel Analyst type of program. Now, this is a number of years ago. So Intel Analyst training or education in colleges was really not that prominent. And there was a few around the country, and we were particularly using this one that I discovered had already been in process after 9/11, looked through it. And I just fell back on my ideas and thought process. How do we do that? Is this really what our job is here at the FBI? And if it's not, then what is our job? Why are we doing the things we're doing? And then let's talk about that. So I immediately got hold of some colleagues over in another agency. We sat down, we talked about what is an intel analyst should be doing? How should they go about their position? What should they be focused on here at the FBI versus maybe other agencies? And once we clarified that, I started moving forward with a new curriculum and curriculum development. Started looking at different curriculum. How are we going to change this curriculum and go through this? And my staff at the time at Quantum was going like, whoa, Nick, you just had an experience with other agencies about intel analyst training. You've just had all this kind of great stuff that's going on in your head. We weren't there. We don't know what you're talking about when you're talking about changing the curriculum, because we're really used to this college-based curriculum. And can you get us caught up to it? And so there was resistance. And I learned right then, again, one of those learning moments, you say, okay, I may be leading this organization, but I'm going to turn around and I see nobody following me on this. So where have I made a mistake, and how do I move forward to get them on board? And so it took a little while to do that. But when you start implementing a process where your staff, your other leadership, however you want to caveat, who's ever supposed to be following you, or you're going together in this, bring them with you, take them to meetings, let them sit, let them hear, let them give you feedback. And I used to ask, okay, we just had a meeting. What did you get out of this meeting? And
that's a great question.
Most of the time, it's like, it's nothing I got out of the meeting. And sometimes they'll even be, what I got out of the meeting is going to be more work for us. I said, okay, well, let's talk about that. Why do you feel that it's going to be more work for us? Where do you see yourself in this process of having to develop a new curriculum? And why is it more work? What can we do to either relieve the work or maybe just clarify it? Because anytime you talk to anybody, right, about changing their environment,
right,
the first thing they will always think of, and this is Pat, I've taught this for years, I've watched it. The first thing everybody's going to think about is themselves, the love of I.
Right. Then how is it going to impact me? Yeah,
how's it going to impact me? Next thing is maybe the love of family. And then maybe thirdly, maybe if you can get them there, you got to get them to the love of the organization.
Right.
If they got a workload and they don't love the organization, they don't see the mission of the organization, they don't see everything going on, you got a problem on your hands. Because you've got to get those lines clarified right away, or you'll have what I refer to sometimes as a curmudgeon employee.
Yes. Yeah. So, well, you know what? You hit on something really important. Looking back as the leader, right? And all of us are prone to it when we're the leader. It feels good to be in front and to be the leader, but looking back and make sure they're still following you is important, because especially if you're heading into dangerous territory, you want to make sure your team is there with you, because they're often stronger, younger, and have the resources to be able to help us accomplish our mission. So coming from a military background, I visualize that. But same thing here, you're doing high level intelligence operations. You're training the future intelligence officers and FBI agents. What a great lesson to make sure, as I said, if you're a person out there and you've been, I don't even want to call it, you've taken the assessment and you're a make sense person. This happens to us all the time. Hey, it makes sense to me. We're going to rock and roll and go forward. The other gold that I heard there is that's a brilliant question to ask after a meeting. What did you get out of it? And how long does that take? It takes 5 minutes in the hallway, right? Hey, what did you get out of the meeting? And you get so much, because people will tell you, you know what, sir, sorry, I got nothing out of it. Or all I heard was, we're going to have to work a lot harder. We go into these meetings with these great plans, and we think what we're saying is resonating and brilliant and everybody gets it. But that's a great question to ask at the end of a meeting, and that's a great leader question. So thank you for sharing and reinforcing that positive questioning and keeping the lines of communication open. You're a leadership expert, but you're also a training expert, Nick. I want to talk a little bit about your favorite Mark Twain quote, and it says, "There is nothing training cannot do. Nothing is above its reach. It can turn bad morals to good. It can destroy bad principles and recreate good ones, and can lift men to angelship. Tell us a little bit about what that quote means to you and why it's one of your favorites.
Well, Dan, the situation, if you look back at I've got what I call the T, and the T is training, education, experience. These three things go together. This is who we are. This is when you look at it from that perspective, and there's other aspects, of course, of the psychology of who you are, but you're a product of your training, your education, and your experience. And you look at that, and when you start looking at other individuals, same what their T is, their training, education, experience, then what we often see is this opportunity to grow based on what other people are doing, what they're saying, and what they know. And what I like about that particular quote is you'll see there's kind of a positive aspect and there's a bringing up of a negative aspect of it. So
right.
I really believe that training and as anytime I get a chance to go to a new course where I say new course for me, watch people train, watch how they train, watch public speakers speak. Maybe there's how do they do that? How do they reach out, grab the audience early on to be able to just say, if I do this, if I grab you quickly, you have an interest, then I'm good to go. But what we see many times is I don't grab the interest of the audience. I don't personalize to the audience. I don't do these other things. So the presentation, whether it's in training or even in education, which education to me, the academic piece, many times is very, I'll say, I have had a number of professors who literally would come to class and they had this yellow kind of legal pad that they would, resonate with when they did their lecture. And then I discovered one day that the yellow pad wasn't bought as a yellow pad. It just over age turned yellow, and you go, this is the same dialect somebody 15 years ago would have forgotten. But I think training is really where it's at. And being a good instructor, being a good trainer is not, it's not intuitive. Maybe you're, having personality and wanting to connect with people, but you got to know how to connect with people the right way in a training environment. And one of the things I do before I can do a class or start training, I get there early. I, walk around the room. I introduce myself. I get to connect with people. I talk to them a little bit. I find out what their name is, a little bit about themselves if I can, and do that as much as I can before the presentation. So when I start connecting, I can say something like, hey, as we get started, I just heard a great thing from Dan. Dan talked about why, his why, what his why is. I think that's pretty marvelous. If any of you other folks here in the class, you ever talk about your why you do the things you do or what you're all about? And that sets the class tone. That is, it sets it up. And the other thing I do, and I'm going to kind of pontificate on this just a little bit, is I've had so many classes we've taught, and we always do the same thing. Instructors come up and they say, "Oh, my name is Nick Nicholson, and I'm blah blah blah," and tell us who you are, tell us where you work, a little bit about yourself, and then move on around the room. And I've changed that totally. I don't even do that anymore. What I do is I reference a CDC study on the idea and concept of starting your morning, starting your day with gratitude or being thankful for something. And so what I'll do is I'll go around the room. I'll kind of exhibit it first. My name's Nick Nicholson. I just want to tell you what I'm grateful for today. And I'll give them, an kind of an example. And I go around the room and I say, and they'll stand up and I say, please stand up, tell us who you are. And they'll say, my name is Dan Dominguez. And I'm going to tell you, today I'm grateful to be alive and I've got an opportunity to have a great business. And they go around the room. And by the time we get done, the things people say, they don't know each other. They'll talk about cancer, illness with cancer. They'll talk about relatives that are suffering from something. They'll talk about themselves, that their child is just going to college, whatever it is.
Right.
And I can say at the end of that introduction period, that whole class, that group of people are so enthusiastic toward each other. They don't even care what organization they belong to. They just know that, Nick just had a problem, and we've had people, say, well, I'm getting married next weekend, and people, clap. Somebody said, today's my birthday. Well, we're going to sing happy birthday, man.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So we don't do our normal introductions anymore.
I love that. The great thing about that, I read a quote recently, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. It says, that it's impossible for anxiety and gratitude to exist together. So if you're anxious about the training, if you're having some nervousness, or you're just not feeling good about spending a day listening, who is this Nick Nicholson guy they brought in to train us, right? But then you start thinking, you refocus with an attitude of gratitude, and like you said, all of a sudden people are thankful. And especially if you hear about somebody that's got a cancer diagnosis in their family, all of a sudden your problems seem this small, right? And so what a great tip for those of us that I've got a 2-day workshop I'm doing Monday and Tuesday. And it's interesting you say that. I do always try to start with where everybody goes around the room. And I often start with gratitude, but I think listening to your example, I think I'm going to always start with gratitude. So there's yet another nugget that we get here from Nick Nicholson. Really appreciate that. I want to ask you a little bit. One of the things you said about discovering your why operating system and being a challenger. One of the things you said is you think that one of the significant aspects is not just to be a member of the group to blend in, but to be a standout in the group. As you've experienced, as you look back as a challenger, maybe that is how you contributed by not just blending in, actually standing out in a group. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Sure. I think, so one thing is, and again, this comes from mentors.
Sure.
And you talked about your service in the Army, and thank you for your service. I appreciate it so much. I was in the Air Force. I think Air Force had a little bit easier lifestyle. Maybe
you're welcome, and thank you also, Nick.
Yeah. But what I learned early on is from Colonel Calvin D. Simon, the Chief of Security Police at Kirtland Air Force Base, which you're there in New Mexico. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh yes.
He was going around and he was doing his typical colonel thing, and I'm just an E2 walking around. Did the salute thing. We were talking. He said, "I just want to talk to you a little bit." And I'm thinking, why does the colonel want to talk to me? Am I in trouble? Is something going to happen? Whatever. And for some reason, he said, "Hey, look, you stand out in every time I see guard mount," which is kind of our formal stand up and inspection time. Every time I see guard mount, you've always seemed to be really on top of things. And you said you stand out. And I said, well, does that stand out? Does that mean a good thing, or is that a bad thing? Or,
right.
I'm going to get in trouble for standing out. And he said, no, it's a good thing. Let me tell you, the ways you stand out. So he described that. And I think everyone has that opportunity. And the thing is, I don't design how I stand out. I don't define that. How it's defined is about how other people see you as standing out, right? So if you're in a group and they don't see you standing out, or they said, no, you're just part of a group, then what would, and I even asked the question, what would I need to do for me to stand out in this group? I mean, I'm with a group of senior leaders, many times with the FBI and the Department of Energy, and I even teach senior executive service folks at Energy now, leadership. And you would think by the time they got to the senior executive service level, which is the highest level in federal government, that they would be expert leaders. Well, none of us are expert leaders. And they start looking at that, and I start talking about standing out. And many of them, most of them would say, that's how I got promoted, because I stood out above the group. Now their standing out piece is different. And I think it's different for all of us. And when I started looking at my why, my first opportunity, when I thought about it, Dan, when you brought this to my attention, was, standing out, challenging people. You don't challenge people by telling them what to do. Right. That's not a challenge. That's a dictatorship, whatever you want to look at. How you challenge people is saying, I heard what you said. Can you tell me more? Because I'm not sure I understand. And by the time, and I discovered this, when people ask you a question, whatever the question might be, it's really not the question that you're trying to answer, or they want you to answer. There's always another question deeper down that they would really want you to answer.
Right.
Sometimes you walk away and you think you've answered the question right, and they walk away. Well, that's not exactly what I was saying. That's not exactly the question I was wanting to hear. Or they just look at you like, nah, okay, I'm not going to continue on. But I think the challenging piece for me, it changed over the years. It's been not challenging, looking at challenging people by giving them some type of direction or orders, whatever it might be, but just asking the question. And I find myself in a situation as a supervisor or a leader, to the point now that I understand where you're coming from, what your why is, I can be a little less critical of you because I see you have a different viewpoint. And I'm going to close this kind of piece out with you, Dan, from the standpoint, I'm in the middle of a study. I'm a lifelong learner, so let's just put that off the table here. At 68, I'm in the middle of a study on Generation Z. What is it's going on with that generation, Gen Z? What's happening to them? Because I will say, most of the time when approached by another generation, not my particular generation, I would criticize, I would comment on it, and make all kinds of derogatory remarks. But after getting into understanding other generations, it's not so much they need to understand me, it's that I need to seek and have an understanding of where they're coming from.
Right.
And I know you've seen studies over and over again of what this generation really is looking at, the things that we've experienced, they haven't experienced. 9/11, that's 25
that's history to them.
History. That's like maybe, I'd say maybe the Korean War, or maybe, to us. So
right.
And they're going, I don't even know about that. I've heard about 9/11, but I wasn't around during that period of time.
Right.
Okay. So it makes it really, it's so important. Stephen Covey said it, first seek to understand, and before seeking to understand, be understood. So.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Thank you. That's really good. Thank you for sharing that. When you talk about, tell me what angelship is, because that's the latter part of your quote. Training can elevate you to, if it can elevate us to angelship, it can lift us to angelship.
Yeah, it's I've tried to do a little bit more background on Mark Twain and his quotes. In fact, I got a book back here on my shelf talking about that. And I think when you talk about angelship, it's really that perception level.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's where people look at you. And let me just kind of personalize this with you, Dan. I've kind of elevated you to the sort of angelship. And here's the reasons. One is that you have a service, and I'll say the product that's very, very applicable to anyone. So let's go there. Secondarily to that, you have a unique way of saying, let's walk through this product, this service. The service is walking through the product that you've just completed. You went through this experience, but now I want to tell you about the experience, which I think is really important. And then the third part of that is connected with not losing connectivity.
Right.
Because I find myself many times, if I don't hear from someone, I put it off. I don't have a priority for that, whatever it might be. And you have a unique way of continually connecting with people. And it's not a bothersome connection. Let me make that really clear. It's not something you're not, haranguing people and saying, oh, I haven't heard from you or whatever. It's a genuine, I'll say agape love for the person to say, hey, where you at? What's going on? Can I work with you? Is there something that you need? Not necessarily looking for some type of long-term contract to make money. It's that, hey, how are you doing? And I think that's really when I say elevated to angelship, that's the kind of thing you look in people. Because I know, we all have some negatives in our background, or, currently we're doing whatever. But when you look at the person, and my experience with that person, like you, has put that in that kind of category for me. So I appreciate that of you. And I appreciate so that's what my terminology is. I never was able to find Mark Twain's angelship. There's been a lot of writings about that whole quote, and you hit it right on the thing that's probably the most elusive, is the angelship part.
That's really good. I wasn't looking for a compliment, but I will take it, and I'll thank you for it. That's really nice of you to say. We work at that. I know I definitely work at that. I think I was talking to Jim Packard yesterday. Jim Packard, a good friend of mine, probably similar in age to you, Nick, and he's recently gone through some health issues. He hurt his back and had to have surgery, and then while he was there getting surgery, he got some cancer. We found a cancer diagnosis, had to go through chemo, and so he's back. And we had our first conversation in a while yesterday. But his son Adam Packard said one thing that I had him on the podcast. And son Adam is a communications expert. He says, Dan, at the end of the day, he with the most conversations wins. And he says, you know, the key to business, the key to relationships, because conversations lead to relationships, and relationships eventually lead to business. And one of my coaching clients is a financial analyst, and he is so good. He says, Dan, I may be talking to you and you may not be a client for 3 years, and I'm okay with that, because I want to get to know you. I want you to choose me, not me choose you.
Yeah.
And so I think you're talking, you know, a little bit about that. Relationships take time, but we can't build relationships unless we have conversations. I was going to read one of my favorite books. I don't know if you've read War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Yeah.
But he's got I think it's a poem. It's called The Artist's Life. But one of the things he talks about is what happens when we don't use our talents. And he says, if you don't do what you're called to do, you shame the angels who watch over you, and you spite the Almighty who created you and only you with your unique gifts for the sole purpose of nudging the human race 1 millimeter farther along its path back to God. And I think when you talk about angelship and helping people achieve angelship, I think that's nudging the universe 1 millimeter, just 1 millimeter, just make your one little difference before we leave this earth, right? Yeah. We've got a limited time here. What are you going to do to leave it better? And I love this also. You mentioned you're 68 years old, and you're still studying and learning, and you're taking on something that most people at your age are like, you know, whatever happens to that next generation, who cares? You're actually looking at that very critical Gen Z that was impacted by so many things that probably our generation controlled, right? Our generations, you know, COVID. You know, some of them graduated high school in the middle of COVID and didn't get to go to senior prom, didn't get to go through their graduation. They had drive-through graduation, or you know, maybe freshman, sophomore year of college were just a blur to them, where they were doing TV college versus experiencing the fun things you and I experienced in college. And so it's a very impacted generation. And kudos to you for continuing to learn and teach. You want to spend the last few minutes we have here together, talking about what you're doing today, Nick. You've got a tremendously diverse background, a lot of knowledge in here that we want to get back out into the world before you're no longer working, because I think eventually you'll retire. I see that you're going to be someone who can contribute way until the end of your days. But tell us about what you're doing now. What's your I know you've got a new venture. I don't know if you're free to talk about that yet, but I'd love to hear about the next direction you're taking. And for those of you who are in your 50s and 60s and think, oh no, all I've got to look forward to is retirement, I want you to help us inspire them by telling us about that next step that you're taking with Aslan.
So and thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that, Dan. So what we've done about 6 months ago, my son, one of my sons, William, was an OSI agent in the Air Force, Special Investigations, and has traveled around the world. And he recently retired, and I say recently, probably about 2 years ago. He's a disabled vet. He encountered some issues and some things he's going through. One is PTSD, and then some other physical issues. And he come to me and he said, "Hey, Dad, we're talking about leadership and things like that. Why don't we start a company?" So we started Aslan Leadership Strategies. It's a disabled veteran-owned small business. He's the leader of the organization, and I work for him. He's the CEO, and I'm the operations guy. And we started this I'll say venture, and we're putting a lot of efforts into it. We're doing a lot of some of our leadership and our coaching efforts are strictly under Aslan now. We're also been kind of involved in the threat assessment. We do a lot of threat assessments. And when I say threat assessments, it's really looking at individuals who may be causing a problem in an organization or otherwise. And we kind of assess that, look at it, and offer the organization some feedback on how they can move forward with this particular individual or group of individuals. But we're doing coaching and leadership and through Aslan. And it's been a little bit of a growth. piece, because we're just trying to still figure it out. We have, we got a business plan, but the business plan many times doesn't always follow where we want to, where we're heading in direction. Somebody calls us and says, "Hey, can you do this?" And we say, "Yeah, we can do that. We just need to figure out the way to handle it, and we can go through that process." So I appreciate you bringing that up too. And then the other part of Aslan, many would say, well, Aslan, wasn't that part of C.S. Lewis's Aslan the Lion and that kind of
right?
Absolutely. It absolutely is. That's where we got Aslan. We have a challenge coin. Many people know what a challenge coin is, and I think Dan has shown something on the side as well. And so our direction in the company, our mission is to serve God. And if that primarily means serve people and serve them in a leadership, servant leadership type of way. How do we do that? How do we bring clients together? And how do we, espouse our beliefs? And that's to serve God. And that's our dedicated position with Aslan. So, it's you know what? When you talk about the Nicholson Group, nobody cares. Nobody. I mean, they don't resonate with it. It's a name. It's like any other name. So. But when you say Aslan leadership strategy, first thing is that C.S. Lewis Aslan, and then it opens up the door for us. So, yeah, it's really been very successful that way.
So you're giving us so a little bit of marketing advice would be, having a great name helps, right? Aslan leadership. It's a strong. By the way, thank you for the challenge coin. I got that in the mail with a nice card from you, and I carry that with me. I have a rack where I keep all my challenge coins in my home office. I got to bring it into this new office so that I could have grabbed it and shared it with the audience today. But we'll put that in the promotion when we promote the podcast. Nick, there's a lot more questions that I have for you, and I'd love to meet your son. So one of the things we'll have to do in our follow up is let's follow up with you guys at Aslan. By the way, it's I want to pull that up. It's Aslan LLC is the website, right? Yeah. So if you're looking for Aslan Leadership Strategies, that is the name of the company, and we'll make sure and put that in the show notes also. And how do people get a hold of you, Nick? If somebody wants to work with you, they've heard something here that says, "Hey, I want to learn more about what you're doing, and I'd like to maybe learn from you and maybe bring you to our facility or work with our team."
Yeah. So best way with Aslan is just Nick at aslan.llc. Again, it's something I learned is we don't need these dot whatever coms, and just make it as short as possible. Again, yes. A learning process. And then direct phone. I take a lot of cell phone calls, and that is our number is 540-273-8684.
We'll make sure and put that in the show notes, and that is so very cool. Talk about taking and implementing Adam Packer's advice. He with the most conversations wins. I have found Nick, and we'll leave on this. Especially the younger generation, they don't pick up the phone. They look at it like, "Why would you be calling me?" But when they do, that means they value you, because I know I speak to a lot of those kids in their 30s and 20s, and they're like, "Well, you're calling, so I figure that's how you guys communicate. So I'm going to pick up the phone." Yeah,
I tell you thank you for bringing that up. I say in the last few months, I went from one of my Gen Zs said, "Nick, internet's out, texting's in, buddy. So text me." Right. Because I'm not looking at the internet. I said, "Okay." So my text line has got it all there. But all I can say as kind of closing here is my response to everything that you're doing, Dan, is really, we talk about the why, but I really think it comes down to if you're thinking about it. We use a lot of different instruments, personality instruments ourselves, but if you're thinking about trying to understand your purpose, trying to understand why you're doing what you're doing, and what's that really come down to, I think and this sounds like a little bit of a promotion for you, maybe it's a lot of promotion, but I would advise your audience to give why and why not, and why leadership an opportunity, because I did truly appreciate going through the whole process and understanding it. So,
no, that's very much appreciated, Nick. You're a gentleman. You're a leader, and you're someone that I'm truly glad to be connected to. So thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your leadership, and sharing your experience with our listeners here on the Lead Different podcast. Guys, if you liked anything that you heard, don't forget to contact Nick Nicholson, at nick@𝘙𝑗𝑠lyn.llc, or just give him a call. We're going to make sure to put his phone number. The other thing I'm going to ask you to do is make sure you subscribe to the channel. Give us your comments. Tell us what you thought about this episode, and make sure you share it with your friends so we can help other people lead different through the power of self-awareness. Thank you very much, Nick. We appreciate you being on. I know you've got an important appointment to get to, so we're going to let you get off the phone and get off the Zoom line here, and we'll see you guys next week on another episode of the Lead Different podcast.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Dan.
Thank you, Nick.
This is Lead Different.
Subscribe now. Discover a new era of leadership. Lead different because great leaders change the world.